Welcome to the Gourds and Pomegranates podcast, talking common sense for church communications. Here's Hannah and Joe.
Hello, we are back for another episode of Gourds and Pomegranates. So we were thinking, if we're seeking to help churches with communications, it would probably be a good idea for us to lay out some of the areas that churches are struggling in. So today, for this episode, we are going to be looking at what churches are getting wrong in their communications. And so we've had a few thoughts and reflections on how churches are struggling in digital comms and their online presence, and we will try to offer some guidance on overcoming potential hurdles. Of course, all of this does come with like a huge asterisk that even though we spend a lot of our time thinking about this and doing it and advising churches and charities and working with them, we don't know everything. And of course, we say all of this humbly, seeking to be honest about where we see areas for improvement, but all the while doing this in love. So we do pray that this is helpful and that you do find sort of encouragement by it as well. So, Joe, do you want to start off with our, I don't want to say big list, it's not a big list, but do you want to start off with the list?
No, that's right. We've got a few main points and we're going to be looking at things that we see churches are lacking in their communication. So hopefully that's not too negative a thing, and hopefully we can do that with some positivity. But the first one is a lack of clarity. So something that we've seen is a lot of the time churches do their communications without asking why. And it's as simple as that, asking why do we need to be communicating? Starting really simply with something that's super common, like signage outside of a church. Most, not all churches, but most will have a sign outside that at the very least says, this is who we are. This is the name of the church. And hopefully a bit more than that as well. So hopefully it will have, some times, some activities, all that sort of thing, maybe link them to the website. But that's something that most churches have. And yet we wouldn't always think of that as communications. It's just something that we do, maybe something that's always been there, or something that every 10 years when it rusts up and needs a paint job, we think about getting a new one. So if we're saying, do we think of that as communications? We need to ask where we draw the line. So maybe we also hand out news sheets to people each Sunday as they come in. Or perhaps we have an email list of our members or our attendees, or the website itself, as I mentioned. All of these things are communications methods, and so we need to think about why we're doing them. I think often churches fall into just adding things to our to-do lists. So, we need a website. Maybe the pastor's had a whim that we need something new, or maybe a volunteer has come in who is gifted in that way. So we add it to the list, or we've just always done it. But we don't go back and revisit and think about why it's there. And I think the reason for me that it's so important to consider what we want to achieve with this is because if we're not clear on it, then we can't even begin to think about how we actually want to achieve it.
Yeah, no, that's really good points to start thinking sort of more holistically about all of it. And I think like the trouble with kind of a lack of clarity is that it can appear in like a number of different ways, and it's really difficult to kind of pinpoint down if you're in the middle of it and you can't quite see it. But I definitely see it when I'm auditing churches and their presence and stuff. It's like kind of the inconsistent messaging. And I've even seen it recently of churches putting, you look on their Facebook page and their last few messages were done kind of Easter time. And maybe they've put something up because of the recent royal news, but it's sort of the last one was Easter. And actually there's a really disjointed inconsistency in what they're putting there. And again, and then you sort of have out of date messages. So if you're looking at our website, again, there's so much about COVID regulations and this is what we're doing. But I'm not going to say we're out of COVID, but we don't really need to have loads of homepage information on what's happening on COVID. I think it's good to still keep informed if it's still relevant, but out-of-date messages can be really off-putting. I have seen churches with, Christmas news up from the last few years, and you're like, why is this on your homepage for like previous events? That's not relevant.
Yeah, I think looking at a church and seeing a message from 2 years ago, you think, what does that tell me about the church now?
Exactly.
If they don't care enough, if they cared enough 2 years ago to update the website, but they don't now, then what, have they just ceased to exist? Are they still having things like that? I think it's interesting you mentioned the inconsistency, because when we've written that word inconsistency down, I've instantly gone in my mind to 1 week it might be on this theme, 1 week it might be on this theme, and it's kind of a bit all over the place and not cohesive. But I guess what you're saying there is that inconsistency in terms of scheduling as much as anything else.
Yeah, and actually, that's true about I suppose the style or the theme. You've got some really lovely photos, and they've put up a photo gallery, and they're like really professional, nearly level of the church barbecue, and then they've just got some stock images that clearly has a watermark over it or something, which that can be pretty off-putting.
Yeah, let's not go down the stock photos route here, because we could be here all day. But my big thing is, it's very hard. Sometimes you have to use stock photos.
Yeah.
It's very hard to say this is exactly what our church looks like, because we want to be aspirational with our messaging as well. A key one that churches come up against is in terms of sort of young people and families. And if you put up a picture which is honest and doesn't have any kids in it, then it's not going to be attractive to families. If you put up stock photos that are terrible, or even good ones of kids and families, and they come along and there's no one there, then have you misled them? And it's that balance.
Yeah.
But I think the consistency throughout, that if you're saying this is the kind of image we're putting up, this is the kind of content that we make, the quality of it, the theme of it, the regularity of it, none of those things can happen if you're not clear about what you're actually setting out to do with your different communications methods.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that as you say, like using stock photos and then sort of, I don't want to say not delivering on it, but that kind of are you mis-selling? Because if someone goes, oh look, they've got loads of families and young people there, and then you turn up and it's not, actually, are you mis-selling? And does that actually cause more of a problem in the long run? But as you say, you want to do something to encourage people to come along. So it's a really tricky one to sort of get absolutely right. But there are times where you see churches only use stock photography, and you just think, I don't actually know what your church building looks like. I don't know sort of generally what the age is there, and that can be very frustrating. I
don't know what I'm walking into.
Yeah, exactly. And especially for new people, I think that's the trouble, or that was the opportunity that online gave us from the last few years of being on video. Actually, you could see what the vicar looked like. You could see what other people within the church looked like. So if they were streaming their Zoom services, actually you could see it. And I mean, my church that I'm kind of starting to settle in is more older, and I don't want to say so I'm settled with the idea that there's not going to be a lot of people my age, and that's fine, rather than sort of not walking into the building and not really knowing, because I'd seen them all on Zoom. I kind of had an idea. Whereas if people are we've now out of the pandemic, there's not much streaming going on, you don't have an idea of what the people are going to be like. And then you walk into the building, which is already a terrifying thing to do for a new Christian. Actually, it's a terrifying thing for someone who's been a Christian for 30 years and then walking into a church. Like, that scared me last year. I thought, I don't know how someone who's new to church, like, my job is church, so still walking into a new church was quite scary. And I thought, gosh, how was someone who's come to faith over the pandemic suddenly walking in? It would just sort of, that was kind of a real eye-opening experience from my point about how we're translating that of people's experience.
Yeah, and I think that eye-opening is an important part of it, because part of doing things with clarity is about looking from the outside and seeing what people are seeing. If all people are seeing is potentially one thing that we've put out there, whether that's a post on Facebook, whether it's a live stream on YouTube, that until they walk through the door, that's the only thing they're seeing. So what message do we want them to take away from that? And that will go on to inform how we design whatever we're putting out. So if it is that poster, if we've only got that one chance to grab someone's attention and communicate something to them, what do we want them to see?
Let's not use clip art.
Exactly. Let's not use clip art. Let's not use terrible photography, but let's be really intentional about saying this poster is to tell someone about this event, and we therefore need to prioritize the name of the event, the time of the event, and how they take a next step, as a really oversimplification of what that communication has to do. in order to get someone to take that next step. So yeah, I think ultimately, if we're not clear on the why of our communication and the why of us using each of these communication methods, we're really going to struggle to get the message across to people, because it won't be clear to them either.
Yeah, definitely. And for me, well, actually, no, you'd probably agree with me as well, that sort of for churches and as Christians, we're not here to just invite people to some club that we're doing. It's about sharing the gospel and the love of God. And so our communications needs to be thought as being missional, because we're both sharing that love, sharing the gospel, and, communicating what we believe and why we believe it. And there is sort of this frustration, and sort of, I suppose this is where the disjointedness of communications happens, is because communications isn't considered a missional endeavor. And it's a big part of our why, as to we should be seeking to reach people for Jesus, whatever that looks like, in whatever form, whatever platform. Jesus went to the people. He didn't expect people to always come to him. He went and searched for where they were. So, as churches, as individuals, as Christians, we need to go to where the people are. And very often, that is online, because if we want to tell them about it, we've got to be in those places.
Yeah. I think the second thing then that we see that churches get wrong is just not enough focus on mission. There's a lack of mission in the communications plans. And that mission, it might not be the only part of why we're doing it, but it should be quite a big part, because as you say, that's what we're called to do as Christians.
Yeah. And I think if it's not seen as it, it's never factored in. So even if in some certain instance we're like, actually, no, we just want to communicate this because we want to promote this thing or something, okay, we're not thinking about it as being missional. But actually, if you think overall about it being missional, you then understand where those opportunities are.
Yeah.
But if we're wanting to reach people not familiar with church, we do need to do it in the right way, especially for those, who haven't grown up. It's different. I can never remember which way it goes round. So, like in the 50s or something, people grew up in Sunday school and then they stopped going as they became adults. And so they were kind of de-churched. Whereas now we're in a generation where a lot of our peers have probably have never even been inside a church bar, the odd wedding or christening or carol service or something. So actually we're in quite an age of unchurched. So actually we've got to understand that people just don't see it in the same way that those who've been in church for 50 plus years automatically assume it.
Yeah, so there was a much higher level of familiarity, and now there's not much, if any. It's quite an alien thing. I'm going to quote an old blog post of mine here, if that's all right, but it's not actually me that said this. I quoted a minister, and he's described it this way. He says, the church has two audiences, the persuaded and the skeptical, the convinced and the curious. We need to find a voice and a vocabulary which connects with both insiders and outsiders. That's what makes the job of the minister and church so challenging. This isn't necessarily something which churches have in common with the business world, because essentially you're trying to reach one person to sell your product, or one type of person. It's quite a focused sort of thing. Perhaps there's an element of returning customers, but actually on the whole it's a lot more focused, whereas the church does have this split audience, in that part of what we're doing with communications is looking to reach people who are already within our church, and that is very often like a transactional, informational sort of communication, where we're saying, have you remembered this is going on this week or this month? But then on the other side, we've got people who have never been to our church, and even within that, we have people who may be Christians that have just moved to the area, or are looking for a new church. And the way we speak to them is going to be very different to the Christians who are already within our church, but it's going to be completely different again to those who might be in our area but have absolutely no links to Christianity at all. And one thing this often looks like is Christianese, which is probably Christianese in itself, because that's something that I've only ever heard within the church. But using words and terms that make sense to people in the church but have absolutely no meaning to those who aren't. And we really need to check ourselves on that sort of thing. We need to be careful that what we're communicating is really clear and engaging to those who aren't familiar with church.
Yeah, for sure. And it as well is how that's kind of then thought about being translated online. Can certain things that we might say really automatic, or not automatically, but we sort of go, yeah, that's our language. actually can that be misinterpreted in a way just because it's online, because actually they're not understanding the context of it.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking slightly again on going back to kind of missionally thinking about communications in this way. One of the things for me over like the last year or so, as I'm kind of taking my job in a more serious way of thinking, actually, this is my vocation, this is my ministry. I don't want to say frustrates, because that sounds really extreme in that way. But again, it's sort of people not understanding it missionally, that we have kind of, we talked about this bit beforehand, I don't think this is the official term, launching services where maybe they don't do it so much anymore, or maybe it's an American thing, but where for those going to travel abroad and do kind of missional, become missioners abroad or places, or go into new roles, we have these services where we pray, bless them, and, highlight the work they're doing. And then, or maybe it's sending out services. Anyway, these launching services. But we need to see online as a new mission field. Why are we not considering everyone in our service as a prayer item? Or like, what would be really encouraging to see, regardless of the size of the church, but is for it to be on prayer lists. And it actually, even more so, I think it's more important if it's a smaller church where there's like one person is doing several jobs. So it's like the admin, the secretary, and the comms person is one person doing all of these jobs. Why are we not asking? We pray for the leaders, the worship leaders. Why are we not praying for those in like the administrative and communications side of the church roles and those serving within the church, and even like, I don't know, talking with the church, whether it's sort of at a service or I don't know, a designated event or something, where you actually say, right, this is what we're going to do. This is who we are as a church, just as the people, as the building, but this is how we're going to communicate. This is where we are. So actually the whole church sees it and understands it, rather than it being just this kind of, oh, well, Hannah deals with that. She, I'm not going to get involved in any of it. And then people wonder what's happening. Whereas actually, if the whole church understands it, again, it's that context. They understand what's going out and why it's going out.
Yeah.
And they see it as this sort of, actually, it's part of service within the church.
But again, it's very hard to do that if you don't have a strategy yourself about what you're wanting to achieve. So you need the clarity, you need that missional part of the messaging there, so that people can realise the importance of what you're seeking to achieve with the strategy. And strategy kind of leads on to our next point. So a lack of organisation. Very often, even if churches have thought about why they're doing something, even if a big part of the why is to be missional, there isn't that planning ahead there. It seems to be perhaps a little bit impulsive. Again, perhaps just that it's always sort of happened this way, and so we'll keep doing it. But organisation with your communications is really taking that why and then putting a focused plan in place as to how you're actually going to do it. So I think that involves asking the right questions. That involves finding out who you're wanting to reach, which again is related to the why. But you're going to want to reach different people in different ways. I think one other failing is that churches will try to spread themselves too thinly and reach everyone, which, we're not to discriminate with the gospel, but very often, if we just have one specific way of communicating with people, that's not going to be able to reach everyone. It's not targeted enough. So by thinking about who, we can then sort of narrow down into how we're going to reach each of those different people groups. I think if you don't do this, not only will you feel like it's unsuccessful, because it probably will be unsuccessful, but you'll end up feeling completely overwhelmed. Everything will just be a bit of a mess if there's not that plan in place about how you're specifically going to reach each demographic or each type of person.
Yeah, and, people plan for like everything else within the church, yet I was going to say, generally churches don't have resources, but there are some churches who have great resources. They've got the the equipment, the people, the money, the time. They've got that ability to focus their attention on it. But for so often, so many churches, I've said already, like they're running, it's a few people doing a lot of jobs, and they're already exhausted and they're already feeling, you know, overwhelmed as it is. So to then not have this time of planning, they're not setting aside this sort of this intentional focus on it, that actually it just doesn't work, you know. So if you've only got a limited time, if you've only got limited money to be able to invest, you've got to spend the time and effort to really invest in that well. But again, if you're not planning, you just have these out of date messages like, oh, well, I haven't had the time to update the website. Well, so you still got some stuff from Christmas on there, which just does no service. And there isn't that focus. There isn't that sort of ability to pass the jobs on if things change, or, you know, well, I'm talking in this way because this is how I want to talk, and then you take it over because I've left the church or something, and then you're talking in your tone of voice because actually there isn't a plan.
That's interesting, actually. So you mentioned the tone of voice, and that's something which can be really hard to define, but actually putting it down even in a simple way is better than nothing. But also the consistency and continuity planning there, that if the volunteer who handles this can't be around, leaves, dies, then what are you going to do? Suddenly all of the communications that the church is doing will just die with them. So having that continuity and planning in place is really important. So we've touched on a few specifics there. What does this organization look like in general? First of all, having a plan. Like I like to take people through and say, right, who are you seeking to reach? What are you seeking to reach them with? How do we do that? And you list out the different activities you're doing, or the different activities you could be doing, and just have it on paper. That's already a lot more than what many churches are doing in terms of organization, and just getting everyone on the same page. Beyond the planning, and again, that's something that we would hope to go into detail more with in future episodes as well. Like what does a communications plan look like? How do we start putting one together? That's a bigger thing than we can cover in 2 minutes here. But beyond the plan, having an awareness of tools that can help you. So whether that's tools for organizing different jobs that need doing and task management, whether that's tools for updating your website, whether that's tools for scheduling and sort of batch processing things on social media so that you're not having to reactively do it every day. You know, all of these things can actually make the jobs manageable. So whether you've got loads of resources, or whether the vicar or minister is literally happy to do it all themselves on the 1 hour a week they find to do it, we can actually manage to productively use that time. And then this will bring a unity across ministries, across ministry leaders, and hopefully within the church as well. Because, as we've said, everyone's on the same page. You're all pulling together with that same goal. And so if you want to have some content that's around the toddler group, for example, if the church runs a toddler group, your ministry leader of that toddler group will get what you're trying to do. They'll get why you need those photos from them that you keep bugging them for, and then actually provide them because everyone's on the same page. And I think that the last thing, and again, this will vary from church to church, it's having someone who's heading it up, or someone who is the point of contact for your communications. That doesn't mean they can't delegate. Again, in some churches, that might be the person who already does pretty much everything else. But at least if it's down on paper as they are the point person, it doesn't become, right, well, I'm just going to go and start a new Facebook page for my ministry, and it's going to be a complete offshoot and not in line with anything else the church is doing, because I've seen that way too many times.
Yep. Definitely agree with that. And also, not that I have a bee in my bonnet about bad posters, but also like it must be so frustrating for you as well, you know, spending ages on people's branding, and you know the church is really good, and then their like youth ministry or something, actually, like it's not even normally the youth ministry, it's, let's say, the toddler group are like, oh yeah, we're going to make our own posters, and you're like, you're not keeping the color, the font, you're just diminishing all the effort and time and money that they've spent.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you can take these things too far, and I think like having brand guidelines is a really helpful thing. To enforce that like with military precision is probably not necessary, but they're there for a reason. And when it diverts from it, it's actually taking away from what you're trying to achieve with the communication rather than adding to it, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Someone said to me recently that so often the communications is seen like under the flower rota, and I was like, that is so true. Like, and that's really upsetting because, I mean, flowers are lovely and I used to enjoy doing the flower rota, but the flowers really don't do anything for anyone outside of the building, should we say. Yet there seems to be this sort of communications gets pushed lower and lower down the priorities list. And, to be honest, I don't think we do any service to God by being messy in our communications. Like,
absolutely.
That is... we're not doing our best in that. And, in communications and particularly digital, they are a big part of church life and reaching those around us. Yet they just get pushed down the list, or it's like, oh, well, we don't have young people, we don't need to think about that. Or, oh, well, we're going to talk about heating the building is really important. What type of coffee we should be serving and stuff. And yeah, they are important things, but actually communications is really informative of both internally how the church will run, but equally as like how we grow and how people see us. And I just don't think that we'd leave a Sunday school group or even Sunday service or the Christmas programme to the last minute or just for anyone to sort it out. Churches should be having a plan in place and have someone responsible. As you say, they can be designated for it. They don't have to do everything. They can delegate it out. But there needs to be someone in charge and sort of with their attention and their service on the communication side to direct the church.
Yeah. So I think, with that, the priority of communications and doing it well, being clear on what we're communicating, and hopefully mission being part of what we're wanting to communicate. The things that we covered so far are fairly practical and fairly fundamental to communicating. The next point, and we've only got a couple more left, but the next point is maybe a little bit less practical, then maybe more reflective. And that's a lack of sincerity. Just because a church's communications might seem successful, we still need to be constantly checking ourselves. Is our heart in the right place with what we're doing? Are we still primarily seeking to reach people with God's word to the best of our abilities, or are other motives maybe creeping into that from time to time?
Yeah, and there's always this risk of like you just marketing yourself for the sake of it, or just producing stuff that actually serves no purpose. One of the things that I always try to say to clients is like, don't just sell the Sunday. Our faith lives are 168 hours of, I was gonna say a day, not a day, a week. That actually, we need to be thinking about not just the Sunday. Are we adding value to the content? Because actually, if you're just selling, it's going to really sort of put people off wanting to engage with you. And that's not just online. I think that can be both on site as well. What other messages can we put out there? Can you offer people kind of not life advice, but sort of, things to actually cope with stuff going on, if that's local news, national news? Can you be entertaining? Could you be light-hearted? Or could you, it seems to be this kind of like shocking thing when Christians are humorous and, we can have a laugh, no, we can't do that. We can't. Actually, I think that people would really warm to us if we showed a bit of humor, possibly. And as well, if we're thinking online, that we're not just thinking about the numbers and only looking at, well, this had this many likes, this had, this reach. Well, then that would be like, yeah, you could say we do something funny that gets loads of hits, and then we go, well, we're only going to produce funny stuff and we're never going to address difficult or more challenging things, because actually that's not putting ourselves in the right place for communicating the gospel. So I think I always say to people that like the analytics and the metrics are always good indicators, but you shouldn't be so focused on that. And I think as well, yeah, not looking or comparing past posts or things like that, because actually you just stress yourself out thinking like if you go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, I mean those are things which can be helpful and can inform, but actually they shouldn't guide us as to what we're doing.
Exactly.
And that comes back to that clarity of why we're doing it and staying close to that. And so it's not just a one-time, right, we've decided why we're going to have a Twitter account, but going back again and saying, is the Twitter account actually serving that purpose for which we set it up? Because the worst end of this really is slipping into this sort of state of hype where we're just building ourselves up, or it's being prideful or maybe even legalistic about how we're doing our content because we see the numbers growing and we just we get this pride, and it's more than the church down the road, or it's just building ourselves up and doing things for the wrong reasons.
So to round up kind of like all the things that we've said so far, like one of the things that in a way I think is like the easiest and almost the hardest at the same time, that doesn't make sense, but sort of hurdle to work through is lack of confidence. And you know, if you're not a digital native, you know, trying to just go, how do I navigate Twitter or what do I do with TikTok can be a really like difficult thing. And also as churches, there is this kind of like fear that, oh, I shouldn't be posting this, or someone's going to troll us instantly, someone's going to misinterpret this and stuff. And there is this fear. And I think it's one of the most rewarding parts of my work is just being able to work with people, and then they come out of this going, oh my goodness, I didn't realize it would be not necessarily easy, but actually it's okay. Like we can make this work. And so one of the things that we really wanted to say to you, our wonderful listeners, is a sort of a sense of reassurance that you don't have to make all of these changes and everything that we've talked about and will talk about like all at once. It's the small steps that really will make the difference, both in your strategy, but equally like your team and your confidence. You know, it's not about having the biggest online followers or people engaged or watching. Like as lovely as a beautiful website is, or, you know, well-made flyers, well-designed flyers are, you know, we do care about those things, and we want to equip you to, you know, utilize those tools and resources and opportunities to grow in it. But actually, it's okay if you're not at the peak of everything. That's not like what we should always be striving for. If you're thinking carefully about these things and seeking to do the best, that with what God's entrusted you with, that's awesome and that is great. And let's just sort of, you know, aim for that. And, you know, working with the talents, both in the biblical story sense and also in the 21st century sense of the talents that we've been given and how we can invest those. That's great. And let's just work with that and kind of like try not to hear the kind of noise around you to pressure you into doing something.
Yeah, definitely. So we want to say, well done, keep at it, keep going. It might be that your efforts don't get recognised by the church around you. It might be that you're not winning awards and being praised for, you know, what you're doing with social media or wherever, but that doesn't mean that there's no value in it. So keep going, and we hope that we can equip you as we go on with the podcast. So we want to pray for you as we finish up here, a prayer of encouragement. So thank you, God. Thank you that you're a creator. Thank you that you've made us in your image, and you've made us as people who can use our gifts to serve you creatively. So Lord, give us wisdom, give us skill as we seek to communicate with those that you've put around us. Amen.
Amen.